Hello and welcome back to our Czech Pirc series. Thank you so much for the lovely comments on the last video. And here we're going to start with looking at the most common move that you're most likely to face if you play the Czech Pirc, particularly online. So here we can see in the Lead Chess database, Knight F3, 31% of games in this position, they play Knight F3. I think practically, if a lot of players with the white pieces, whether over the board or online, when they see the Czech Pirc, this is their most likely response, because it can't be a bad move. It just develops the knight and it's fairly flexible. But at the same time, I think it gives us great chances, and we can see, if we look at how black scores, we score very well. We're looking even at the Masters database, black's doing pretty well. I'm going to be recommending bishop g4, which is this move. And we can see black scores much higher than average here. And online 50% roughly wins, so that's pretty good. So what's our plans here and how are we going to get the win? Well, the first thing to notice is white, it has this pin on f3 that he has to worry about, so he can't really go as aggressively as he wants. Most players are going to play bishop e2 here, so we can see in 46% of games, but we score very well there. And we basically only have to worry about one aggressive plan here, which white has to know really well just to cause us any sort of trouble, and even then we should be fine. So the best move for white is probably h3 here and to go for a quick g4. But majority of your players are going to play bishop e2. So in this video we're going to look at the normal moves, the most common moves, bishop e2, and then in the next video we're going to be looking at the much more forcing move, which is h3, bishop h5, then g4 followed by a quick queen e2, which tiny bit of theory to learn, but it's not too bad. So bishop e2, the most common move. Now we have a choice, we can either play knight d7 or e6 or e5 even. So let's think about this position for a bit, and this is where we have a choice. We can either play e6, which is the most common move in the Masters database by quite a large margin, or we can play knight d7, which is the most common online among everyone. And essentially there's two plans and they're both perfectly good for black. You can either play this position as black, like a Philidor, an improved Philidor where your bishop's on g4 already, or you can play it as if you're playing an improved French defense. So that's the way most masters play it. So you play e6 here, and essentially you're going to play d5. And the point is, if you can imagine a French defense, you have your bishop on c8, and it's often quite weak there. With the bishop on g4, it's much improved for us, and we score really well here. Actually, if you look at, you can see black actually scores higher than white here, and even in the Masters database. So even among masters, black is actually scoring slightly better than white, which tells you something, even though objectively this is probably about equal. So we have a really easy plan here with e6. We're just going to play d5. So let's say castles. We can play d5 straight away, or we can play bishop e7, play bishop e7, h3, bishop h5, and now we can either castle, we can play d5. I'll just play d5 here. And if white takes on d5, we've got a pretty nice position. Just take back with the e pawn, or the c pawn if you want to keep it a bit more dynamic. Say c pawn. We're completely equal here. I actually think black's might be slightly better here. Got this bishop outside the pawn chain. You can bring our knight out, get our rooks out, castle. It's perfectly good for us. So bishop e3, d5, and now e5's got to be the most testing move. And now just knight d7. And this has happened in quite a few Grandmaster games over the years, and black's scoring pretty well here. We're just going to play c5, knight c6, and essentially pretty much the same plans as you have in a French advance, but an improved one because our bishop's already outside the pawn chain. So it's pretty good for us. Now the other option here is to play knight d7, and this is actually my pet line against this line, against the Knight F3 variation. Ever since, for years I've played this and it's gone really well for me. Essentially I'm going to play this as though it's a Philidor. So if you can imagine a Philidor, you try and play e5 and then queen c7 and bishop e7, castles. So let's say castles here, Then we play e5, play bishop e3, bishop e7, and I've had this position countless times online, and I've even had it over the board. And honestly, I think black is absolutely fine here. Just play queen c7, so you got games by Copian and some strong players in it. I mean, I think this is just essentially an improved version of mainline Philidor, because this bishop on h5 gives us a lot of options. Because if it was in traditional Philidor, it'd be exact same position as this, but the bishop would be on c8, and I think it being outside the pawn chain gives us a lot more dynamic counterplay. In worst case scenario, we'll swap off this bishop for this knight, or this bishop. We'll have a really solid position, but in many lines we can actually drop it back to g6, pressurize e4. And a lot of players as white here don't really know what to do, and so they can end up, we can improve our position very easily. We're going to play queen c7, we're going to castle, and then we're going to just bring our rook into e8, d8, and white's kind of struggling for a plan. They often make an error, play some bad moves. In a few moves you get a really nice position. So I think this is a really nice winning try actually, because it keeps all the pieces on. Got a really heavyweight middle game coming up. I mean, to give you a flavour of just how much trouble white can get into, I mean, Hari Krishna is a top player for India, who recently was part of the gold medal winning Indian team at the Olympiad, and here you can see him losing against Rohes, who's a lower rated player, but still very strong obviously. And essentially Hess did the idea that we did, transposed into it with e5, and essentially played as black Philidor here. And these are quite natural looking moves, and he got a great position, and he managed to get a really nice win here against Hari Krishna as black, which is not an easy thing to do obviously, so a really nice win there. But the main takeaway, so we go back here against Hari Krishna, is he basically wants to play the Philidor with e5, just an improved version of it with bishop on g4. That's what you need to remember on this line. You're essentially, regardless of whether we're going to play e6 or e5, we're just going to make use of the fact this bishop's on g4, it's outside the pawn chain, so we're just going to make use of that and play the normal moves, but a slightly improved version of it, and that can cause white a lot of problems. Now if you're playing this position as black, it's important just to know what to do against some of white's unsound ideas here that don't work, but if you don't know what to do, you can quickly go wrong. So what do we do if they just play e5 here? So that's a forcing move, immediately threatening our knight, and it's important to know whenever this happens in this line, you need to take this pawn. Don't move the knight, don't do other things, because you can get yourself into trouble quite quickly. So let's say you play, I don't know, knight d7 here, you can see white's got an edge here, there's no need to allow it. So position's about equal, we just take it. Now if white takes back, we have a pleasant choice. We can either play knight d5 or we can just take here, and actually white is actually slightly better here. Sorry, black is slightly better here. We can play knight d5, and okay, the engine says it's equal, but I think black is completely fine here. But I'd rather play black here, because you've got easy development. You're just going to pressurize e5, so e5 is nothing to worry about as long as you know. Just remember, they play e5, take it. So let's say they do it a move later, they try that exact same thing again, we just take it. So here you probably notice they can go the knight takes this time, but again it's no problem. And here just take this. Now they go queen takes, we can take this pawn, so we're going to have to go knight takes, and we've completely equalized here. We can go, well, we have a choice, we can either go knight d7 or bishop d6, or we can even try c5. So let's go knight d7, they take it, and we're just going to go bishop d6 next move, so it's completely fine. So what about other ideas here to cause us trouble? What about d5? I think d5 makes more sense than e5. But again, we've got a nice load of options here. d5 isn't actually threatening anything, because really, is white really going to take this pawn? We can just take it back with either the b or knight takes. So I mean, I'd be tempted here, I think in my own game, just to go knight d7. The most common move given the Masters database is to actually go g6, but I think c takes d5 is completely fine, but I'm going to recommend you go just knight d7. Point is, if they take here, we're just going to take back. We've got plenty of play on this b file later on. Go on the b2 pawn. You can play e6, bishop e7, even consider g6, bishop g7. In fact, you know, I think if anything I prefer black here. So let's say they go b2, then we can just play either g6 or queen c7, depending on what we feel like doing. But the main point here is that we're completely equal. Well, 0.1, but I think we're equal anyway. Let's go g6, castles, bishop g7. This position's completely fine. White's really struggling here to find any way to really put any pressure on black. So we can just, if they play h3, we can just take takes, castles. We've got plenty of control over these squares. Gonna get rook c8 in coming. I think black is, yeah, black's doing pretty well. So nothing to worry about really. So let's look at some other tries now in this position that white can do, which we're completely fine against, but if we haven't seen them before, maybe we might go wrong. So there's something like queen d3 here. I always find these type of moves can be easily to go wrong against, because maybe they can castle queenside at some point, put some pressure on us. But if we just play knight d7 here, I actually think this queen on d3 helps us. I'm just going to go e5, queen c7, bishop e7. So let's say, so they go, I don't know, bishop e3. Go for a sort of queenside. Let's go e5, castles, and queen c7. And I think black is absolutely fine here. If they ever take, we're just going to take back with the pawn, get our bishop to b4. Otherwise, we can just go bishop e7, castles, and then go for a queenside attack. We thought this queen on d3 is a bit misplaced because this knight at some point could come up and parry it. Also could end up being in the way of this bishop, who kind of can't really get out. So I think we're completely fine here. So another try to be aware of is bishop g5, which looks kind of scary because it kind of suddenly you're sort of thinking of e5 becoming more dangerous and other things. But we'll just play knight d7 here. And if they try e5, it just loses the pawn because we can take this knight and we're going to pick up the pawn. So let's just see that. Just take here, and then yeah, I'm just going to win the pawn. So that's absolutely fine for us. So let's say queen d2. Then we maybe take this knight, or we can just play queen c7. Maybe bishop d3. It's an idea. Just going to play e5. So essentially, pretty much in every single variation, if white plays something unusual, like I don't know, anything here, a4, we can pretty much do our idea of knight d7 and e5 against pretty much everything. And there's not a lot white can really do to stop it, and we're absolutely fine. So that's why I quite like this position for black, because pretty much against pretty much anything white does, we can do this and we're going to be absolutely fine. This game by Cobian kind of illustrates how we can handle playing black the way I like to in my pet line. So the knight d7 with the e5 plan. So white playing natural moves here, bishop e3, and knight d2. So this is something you're going to see a lot. Lots of white players in this position here are going to, if they haven't seen this position before, they're going to get a bit confused. They're going to be, because they're not quite going to see a plan for white, because black's structure is so solid, there's nowhere for white to really attack it. So you're going to see a lot of white players here go into the tank and really try and find a plan. And knight d2 is a very common move. Elite chess has queen d2 as the most common move among normal players, but it's not actually that good a move. Black scores really well. So you're going to see here a lot of white players play moves like d takes e5, which isn't very good. It helps us. We can even go bishop e4 later on and stuff, but they're not really going to know what to do here. And that's one of the main advantages of the Czech Pirc. You're going to know this position and they're not going to know it. So we're going to play knight d2 here, which is one of the best moves, but we can actually play bishop g6. We can take this bishop, it's about equal if we do, but bishop g6, it makes sense to pressurize this pawn a little bit. Most aggressive move by white. Now here, black is just playing normal Philidor type moves. Queen c7, rook e8, he's probably going to go back to f8 type ideas. Knight e5. Now this is a really thematic move, taking advantage of this pin on the d file. You can play other moves here, but I think knight e5 is a really aesthetically pleasing move because, let's say, black takes here. We've got this discovered on the queen, so we're going to get this bishop. And once we've got this bishop, we're going to be a pawn up, so white can't really take this knight. So he moves here, and now we've got the bishop here. And we're actually better now, queen c8, we're going to get queen into the game, and it all goes horribly wrong right now. I think looking at these moves as for black, I don't think these are moves that you're going to struggle to find too much. Black just had a few too many trumps in the position, and f4 just wins the game. So obviously bishop takes, or a nice checkmate net coming. Take goes back here, go queen c1. We can even pick up this knight, maybe get checkmate. And so once we get into this position, I think we're completely fine. And now h3 is the most testing move. This happens in around 22% of games that get into this position, players play h3, and I think it requires an entire video for me to just show you the lines, because I think it's the most forcing move white can play here. It sort of sets us some questions, but we're completely fine. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the entire video, and good luck if you've started playing the Czech Pirc. It's a really fun opening. If you can subscribe or write a comment in the YouTube comments, helps me a lot. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.